Welcome into Basketball by Association. I am not Sir Archibald Shea. He has the week off here, so I am joined on Basketball by Association. I'm Joel Cordes. I'm joined by my good friend Dan Lewig, a guy who has been on the show here a couple of times before. And if you're a longtime listener, Dan and I go way, way back. We started our broadcasting career together really almost 20 years ago, which is hard to fathom at this point, but really awesome.
I remember chiseling out my my program notes back in the day.
Yeah, on tablets of stone. We're going to be talking a lot of really cool stuff here on BBA. This will be our first show since free agency opened. We did kind of a preview show before that, had some technical difficulties and that sort of thing. So it's really the first time that we get to unpack all of the free agent movement, the big trades. We're going to talk the Rudy Gobert trade. Dan is a fellow long-suffering Timberwolves fan. Thank you, all of the stars above, Archie Shea, for taking the week off, because it means I don't really have to talk about the Knicks. I mean, yeah, we'll get to the Jalen Brunson thing. I guess we'll talk about that. But we don't have to shoehorn the Knicks in here. We get to spend some actual quality time with the Minnesota Timberwolves and one of the most polarizing trades in a long, long time. But that's not the only thing we're going to talk about. This is episode 113. We will get to Dejounte Murray to the Hawks. We'll talk about Malcolm Brogdon to the Celtics. We'll probably touch on Russell Westbrook and Kyrie Irving, although it seems like we have to do that each and every week. We'll talk about all that stuff. But episode 113 means that we've got to name it after somebody. So there's only 3 players in NBA history with 113 career playoff games. One is Bill Bridges, the other Jamal Wilkes. Those guys would all be deserving, but the third member of this club kind of just demands to have the episode named after him. It's not that any of us really want to or like that we have to do this, but it's kind of just demanded because that's really just who this person was.
I'm pretty sure if we didn't, he would come down here and just deck us if we didn't.
Right. There might be a folding chair over our backs because he is probably... It's hard to call somebody the original, but he might be one of the original NBA heels, to steal that wrestling term. This is the Bill Lambert episode. 113 playoff games, as a 2-time NBA champ. Oddly enough, and a lot of people don't realize this, Lambert was a 4-time All-Star. He was the total rebounding champ as well in 85-86. Most of that career, of course, spent with Detroit, but did play a season and a half with the Cleveland Cavaliers to begin things, and had a few seasons where he was statistically prolific, especially in the early 80s, kind of as Detroit was on its rise, on its ascent before they really got good. 17 points a game, 12 boards, multiple times during that span. As his production started to dip, that is when Detroit really kind of took that next step and had those other weapons. And Lambert filling that role as a stretch guy, a defensive guy with some rebounding, but really it was the
down and dirty,
the psychological game. Him and Rick Mahorn, who we actually have had a Rick Mahorn episode already this season, in fact. So kudos to those two guys for doing what made us hate them so much, but being relatively successful at it. You made the comment off the air that naming it after Bill Lambert made a whole lot of sense, and it really does, because it's a big flavored episode. We got to talk about the Rudy Gobert trade to Minnesota. That was not something that we really saw coming. It was rumored that Minnesota was kind of in the mix for Gobert, but myself included didn't really take it seriously because, well, why would Utah want to take D'Angelo Russell? Why would they, Minnesota's not going to give up Anthony Edwards. They're not going to give up Karl Anthony Towns. Does it really make sense to put those two on the same front line? Yes, there's some interesting pieces like Jaden McDaniels, Malik Beasley we knew would probably be on the block, and there was lots of other good bench pieces. But I think the deal that we got, Dan, was surprising for so many reasons. Not only because the deal actually happened and Minnesota taking this risk, because that's what it is, to put 2 of the top 5 centers in the league together on the same team. But they're able to land Gobert without giving up D'Angelo Russell, which on the surface sounds like a coup. But instead, they're giving up what's essentially 4 draft picks. They're giving up Jared Vanderbilt, who has been the Wolves' high motor guy the last couple of years, and then their locker room leader in Patrick Beverley. Malik Beasley goes too. He was one of the most prolific three-point shooters last year, despite a very slow start, which shows you how good he was once he got hot. But Patrick Beverley is a guy that spent 1 season in Minnesota and is being credited, as much as Anthony Edwards gets the credit for being so talented, Patrick Beverley with changing that culture and really being that heel type of character for Minnesota that gave them an identity. And for them to have signed Beverley to his money and cut bait and moved it, and then the 4 draft picks, what's your level of surprise with this deal? And what's your level of discomfort with it? Because the national media, of course, a lot of them just hate this deal. They hate it. And I can see where they're coming from. But as Wolves fans, you and I have a little bit of a different perspective on this.
Yeah, I think for me, what you're talking about is the surprise that everyone loves rumor season, right? And it's fun to see the Wolves associated with that. These are the waters that they normally don't fish in, right? This is not the way the Wolves have been constructed. As big of a bold risk as it is the biggest bold swing that they have made pretty much in franchise history.
Yeah.
And for that, kudos to it's a new era in Wolves land, as you have Tim Connolly. How long has it been since the Wolves have actually had what you'd call not only a competent or respectable coach and front office tandem
at the same time? Because it's often been one or the other, right?
Yes. And so to have that at the same time and to put them in top 10, if you put the combo together in NBA, that's not. Minnesota's known for dysfunction more than it is anything else. We have I was listening to Zach Lowe and just going through from Khan to all the dysfunction that has been there from front office style. You now have new ownership that's making their big step here within this. You have a competent executive vice president here for taking care of that side of it. You have a coach that's gifted, that he can move around with whatever the pieces are that's there. And so when you put it together, yes, it's surprising. But with what's been built now, this is a different Wolves focus, different Wolves swinging for the fences and getting it. And I think that's extremely surprising in a good way in Minnesota, just at the surface level.
Yeah, the reasons, and I'll talk about the reasons why I love it and maybe don't love it as much. But the love for this is by far the biggest move, that they've made since 2003 when they bring in Sam Cassell and Latrell Sprewell, and they hastily put together a lot of role players at that time. Troy Hudson's brought in Michael Olowokandi, a lot of other guys that kind of fleshed out that roster because they knew and they were making a big bet that by getting those pieces who were a bit of a buy low candidate at that time, that was going to make them a contender around Garnett. And I feel a little bit similar in that this is sending a message to Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns that whatever has transpired in the past in franchise history doesn't need to keep happening. As you said, new ownership, willing to spend money, willing to really push for a contender, and a front office that's going to take those swings right away. I think that means something for keeping Edwards long-term, for keeping Cat long-term, even if they have to make a move that sends away Cat's best friend in D'Angelo Russell, or one of his best friends. That's been kind of the elephant in the room, as Russell has been on the trade block to go, okay, but if he goes, how excited was Towns when he arrived? And it's not like Russell's been a disaster at all. You kind of got exactly what you thought you'd get from D'Angelo Russell, which is a gunner who also is a phenomenal pick and roll passer, who is a decent rebounder, but not a good defender, although he's worked at that. And then shot selection that makes you want to just light yourself on fire. But he makes enough of those shots and has the guts to take those shots in big moments that he is the wild card.
So here's the true surprise in this trade. is that the Wolves kept the top 4 players on their roster.
Yeah.
And you still added a potential top 10 player, right? The top 20, however you want to categorize him.
Gobert is not top 10, I would for sure, but on the defensive end, yes. Yeah.
And so I think that part's surprising. Now they've went all Michael Jordan on them picks, and to have the pretty much they don't care about who's going to be who's in 6th grade right now for their 2029 first. But what I like about this trade, it's easy to deadpan and say, like, well, again, they're zigging when everyone else is zagging.
Mm-hmm.
And is this the type of organization that you feel confident when they do something different against the grain to say, well, is it really a smart move? But again, we've talked about why it's a different era. It's not the same team in that regard. But why I like this trade, number one, is D'Angelo Russell. By keeping him, and he's a pick and roll guy, what has Finch not wanted to do as much in this past season? He was not as big on the pick and roll, despite having some of those guys there. Now, Rudy Gobert and D'Lo, that is going to be an excellent pairing, and it's going to be the true question comes down to how do you do it when everyone has to be on the floor in crunch time?
Yes,
because the way you space it out, you can have D'Lo and Gobert should be a pairing.
I think so with the second unit.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
the second unit.
And you can run good offense that way. Defensively, people have pointed this out, and this definitely needs to be said. It's been overstated about Gobert being played off the court in the postseason. You have the rest of the team that was almost turnstiles in Utah when it comes to defense. You have Jalen McDaniels, who's good on the wing and improving defensively in that regard. You can at least make the case that there's a better defensive core with what Gobert has now than what he did in Utah. I think that will help me. And none of these guys are lighting up all defensive player within the rest of it. But I think collectively, when they try doing the run around defense within it, having him in the center is going to allow them to do that better.
Yeah, I mean, I would counter that. I think Utah's defensive core was probably as good, if not better, than Minnesota's, in that you had Royce O'Neal, you still had Mike Conley, or at least the ghost of Mike Conley. Joe Ingles, a pretty decent defender while he was there. There's a few others. Minnesota, that was where they struggled last year, despite having Pat Beverly, despite the fact that Vanderbilt was more often than not a plus defender. You saw where Jaden McDaniels was going to go as a plus defender, but he wasn't quite there yet. It was those moments. Edwards competed, but we saw Towns and D'Angelo Russell compete. Taurean Prince was very helpful defensively, but it still was a problem. Minnesota was an offensive team that needed to get on the same page defensively, but you saw the foundation being laid there, and you could understand that with a little more seasoning and maybe a little bit of roster tweaking that they were going to be all right on that end. If there's any concern that I have from this deal, it's not the 4 draft picks. I understand what that looks like on paper, but Minnesota is making that commitment to say, we're going to be a playoff team as long as Anthony Edwards is here. It really transcends Karl Anthony Towns at this point. These are going to be mid to low first round picks, and we are okay with that to bring in a defensive guy. It's really important to remember that Karl Anthony Towns was drafted originally out of Kentucky as a power forward. There was the thought that he probably would transition into being a center in the NBA, and that's what happened. But he played power forward next to Willie Cauley-Stein at Kentucky. And it was really the Wolves roster that necessitated him moving to the 5. And Minnesota forever has been trying to find a good 4 next to him, somebody that could stretch the floor or play inside, play good defense, hit the boards, basically clean up for Towns on that defensive end. And to be able to rethink that idea and go, well, wait a minute, we've been searching for this 4. We've been trying to groom Jared Vanderbilt and Jaden McDaniel. They were on track, but not quite there yet to be, elite by any means. But if you can get Rudy Gobert and move Towns back to the 4 in certain lineups against most opponents, you're going to create as many mismatches as you yourself might have. Gobert is pretty decent in the pick and roll. That's one thing that a lot of people forget. He's a plus defender in the pick and roll. Towns, not great, but you know what? Towns was not great either way. whether you have Gobert or Jared Vanderbilt next to you, he's not great either way. You're just going to have to deal with that. So I don't think it changes anything in the half court where they will be able to operate, because Towns, for as decent as he is in the post, he would rather play facing up. He wants to shoot the three. He wants to play at the free throw line. He'd rather take people off the dribble. When he's played with his back to the basket is where they get in trouble. I don't think his role changes all that much. And Rudy Gobert really is going to do what Jared Vanderbilt did, which is stand in the dunker spot, stand in the short corner, gobble up offensive rebounds, and you will now be able to run a pick and roll with him, which is something you could not do with Jared Vanderbilt. So half-court offense, half-court defense, I'm okay. Here's the two places I don't necessarily love it. In transition, when you have the Twin Towers, can they get back quick enough? It's not that either are slow, but Towns has been known to not run at full speed all the time. That's going to be an issue when Vanderbilt was one of the faster players out there with a high motor. Gobert has a decently high motor too, but it's not exactly the same. You might get in trouble that way. And then transition going the other direction. You're going to have two trailers now. That may not be a problem because Anthony Edwards has been a one-man fast break, and they've got other wings that they can put out there. Jalen Knoll, D'Angelo Russell when he's out there, even Taurean Prince. There's a couple of other new guys coming in, Kyle Anderson, Bryn Forbes. We'll talk about them in a minute, though neither of them are fast. But you're going to be able to have your options, but now it's Towns trailing for a three. It's Gobert trailing for a dunk. It changes things. I think the biggest issue for me, Dan, is that there's a long history in the NBA of misjudging when you make an all-in type move. And typically you want to save that until you know either I'm about to lose a star and I got to put it all on the table to keep that guy and take the shot that we're going to stay. A lot of times that doesn't work. Or we've been building and building and building towards this, and now it's time to put all that money on the table, pull out all the stops, load up this bench, we're going title hunting. And there's very few teams that put themselves into position to do that, and a few more that will think they're in that position and try it, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't work out. This, as you said, is, if not the biggest move in franchise history, one of the biggest moves, or the second biggest move, I should say, talking about however you want it with Cassell and Sprewell. But it really feels like an all-in type of move because of what you gave up. Yeah, there's still a little bit of wiggle room on the periphery, but all in for a team that lost in the first round last year. That's where I think a lot of the national pundits who maybe don't watch the Wolves that much, they saw them in the playoffs when they came off kind of like a bunch of punks, and they didn't realize all that had built towards that and where the foundation is for this team. But I can understand where people are coming from going, Minnesota, do you not understand where you are yet? You need to win a first round. You need to win that second round. And you're like mortgaging to go all in thinking this is like a title move.
It's even beyond that in terms of not only going all in, but going all in on a strategy that is completely gambling versus what has been in the NBA for what's been successful in the NBA to date. So there's that part to it. There's the think of the full on in from ownership. They are now committing to this is the core. Like what you're seeing in the next 5 years, this is the team that's going to be there. And you're saying by doing this, you're going into luxury tax within the next 2 years. Once Ant gets his big extension. So they're saying this is the core. We're going to be putting all this money investing into this, all the draft pick sacrifice to say this is what's here. Number one, it's fascinating. I think as whether an NBA fan or a Timberwolves fan, this is going to be one of the biggest storylines of this next season, of seeing, can it work? Can you put these two together? Where I have confidence in it is they have a head coach who has done the Twin Towers multiple times in his history. You go back to New Orleans. You had Cousins and Williamson,
Anthony Davis,
So you have those guys within it. He's done it, and I'm forgetting the other time that he's had another a Twin Tower element to it, where he has successfully managed putting that together. It wasn't until in New Orleans, it wasn't until injuries took place that really started.
Granted, Finch wasn't the head coach, but he was part of a coaching staff that was doing that.
So at least having experience working with it. And you do have two guys that you're putting together that are their weaknesses and strengths complement each other. And I think that's very interesting within this, that you have guys that for doing the dirty work, what Cat struggled with, that's what Gobert does, right? I mean, that's the whole the fit there. And you have one of the best shooting 7-footers in NBA history, who can hit from 38-40% from threes from downtown within it. And I will say, I am personally looking forward to a pick and roll of those two guys together.
Oh yeah, 5-5 pick and roll. I think one of the other things that is missed in people wanting to laugh this idea of trying a Twin Towers in the year 2022 is that last season especially, there was a very significant drift back towards traditional lineups and even extra big lineups. We've talked about it on this show before. New Orleans, for example, put CJ McCollum at the point guard and then 4 guys with like 7-foot wingspans out there together. You know, you had Valanciunas, you had Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, obviously incredibly lengthy. They would swap in a 4th guy depending on the lineup, and they just went big. And even when Zion comes back, which he will, can he stay back? But they're going to be a big team. Memphis has gone very big over the last couple of years. Utah played fairly large last year. Now, whether they're going to be a force in the Western Conference anymore or not, I don't know. But even when you look at Golden State, who's been, the harbinger of small ball here for a while, what have they done? They know they're going to have James Wiseman back. Draymond Green is going to play the 4. If you've got Wiseman and Kevon Looney, those are your centers. And you've got Draymond, you've got Jonathan Kuminga as your 4s. That is a traditional front line. And yes, they're going to be flexible and go small at times and try to get that mismatch. But you can go up and down the Western Conference, and you are not seeing these small ball 4-guard rosters like we were seeing in the last couple seasons. A lot of the teams that Minnesota would conceivably run into, even the Lakers, yet they had to go small by necessity last year because nothing was working, and they threw everything the kitchen sink to try to find a lineup that would work. It didn't work. But when the Lakers won the championship, they were going big. 2 years ago, still, they were going big. So the Clippers is another team that's going to be a traditionally sized front line through most of the time, even though Ty Lue has shown, hey, I'm going to go small during certain portions of the game. So I think the flexibility now is you can put Gobert out there by himself in 4 guards if you want. You can put Cat out there in 4 guards if you want. And you may have to stagger them. That's a lot of money and a lot of draft picks to have to stagger guys. But there's going to be enough times that you can play them together to either create that mismatch or to accommodate for the fact that a lot of your opponents are now going to be larger size players too. Before we move off the Wolves, and by the way, Arky, suck it, because we get to talk about the Wolves for this long, and it's been refreshing to do so uninterrupted. And you can't get mad at me because of all the times that we talk about the Knicks. Kyle Anderson, Bryn Forbes, any needle movement there? Any thoughts maybe on other guys that you would have preferred? I don't mind either of these deals, and it does feel like rounding out a roster for a team that has gone from missing the playoffs essentially, 19 out of 20 years, basically, to now all of a sudden going, yeah, we made it to the playoffs, and our sights are so much bigger than just winning a round.
I'm going to tie my Anderson comment in with my final Gobert comment because it all goes together for one final thing that what I truly like the most about this trade and about this offseason for the Wolves is for any team, when you have a glaring weakness, and it was through the whole Rosas era, they did not have a power forward. It was a glaring hole every time it was out there. And Cat already with his challenges, you want to get under his skin. You want to get him out of the headspace within it. You put someone physical on him, and eventually it causes a disruption.
Yeah,
foul trouble, and just getting him out of it in the headspace. What this has done is, I don't know of another team that looked at a weakness that they had and said, we're going to take this weakness and we're literally going to put the best person available and one of the best in the NBA when it comes to defensive rebounding.
And one of
defense.
the better ones in NBA history.
Correct. And 3-time all defensive player. This is as much of filling a massive hole to the best of your ability as any team could do. So I really like that element to it, and that ties into Anderson. When you don't have Gobert out there, when you have Cat there, now you have another defensive presence at the 4 that you can do when you use him in that position. Even Taurean Prince, when you can use him now, he now moves to a 3 in some of these spots. If you really want to go big, the Wolves can now go big. They've been beaten up.
Jaden McDaniels and that arm, that wingspan and the growth that he's shown defensively. You hope with another year under his belt, he's going to be a big plus now too.
And some say that the 3 is the best spot for him long term, anyways. And so I think that becomes another way with that wingspan and the height and what they can do. The Wolves couldn't do that. You could push them around. They have in the Cat era. That was part of Jimmy B's challenges with stuff with it. They didn't have the physicality to it. Beverly did what Butler could not do of unlocking the culture within it to have more, at least the effort was there. Now you add in the elite talent of what Gobert can do along with that. I'm very intrigued by it, but the Anderson deal definitely shows more of that commitment to we need a more physical presence. And again, addressing that glaring weakness.
I'm excited by Kyle Anderson's ability to handle the ball and kind of be another point guard on the floor. He does just a little bit of everything. He is, if not a huge plus defender, he's at least a plus enough. He's a guy that really handles his job. Like, he takes his assignment and you're not going to have really any weakness from it. And I mean, every essence of glue guy. And I was really surprised that Memphis let him get away. I was hoping the Wolves were going to sign Joe Ingles coming back from injury. Anderson is a younger version, honestly, and probably the better fit. The only difference is Ingles is a better 3-point shooter, but the Wolves do have enough of that elsewhere. Bryn Forbes is a specialist fine off the bench, but he really hasn't done anything since his days with the Spurs. That is a perfect segue before we get to all the free agent signings, and a lot of them were just re-signings. So we'll do a love-hate on that in a couple minutes. But before that, the other big trade during the beginning of the offseason here was the San Antonio Spurs essentially pulling the plug on their half reboot of the past 5 years. You remember that when Kawhi Leonard wanted out of San Antonio, they trade for DeMar DeRozan. They acquired LaMarcus Aldridge, and they tried to build around those two veterans on the tail end of their prime, at least, with a bunch of young guys. Now, these are young guys that the Spurs were picking as low first rounders because they had been so good during the Duncan and, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Kawhi Leonard era. So guys that were picked at the end of the first round or the beginning of the second, and in true Spurs fashion, they were having these guys play above their draft position. But they didn't find a Tim Duncan out of this group. They didn't find a Tony Parker or a Manu Ginobili in the second round. And Duncan, of course, was taken number 1, so you knew what you were going to get. But you didn't have a superstar land in your lap. What San Antonio was able to do was build a lot of guys from low draft picks into solid starters, career starters. And it wasn't enough. And Arky and I have been talking about that on this show for a couple of years now of who's the superstar in San Antonio. We know Dejounte Murray is a star. He's an all-star player because of his defensive ability, and he's good enough on offense. But what else did they have? They had a lot of guys who you could be confident to fill that role, but, just as a solid starter. And yeah, you had Greg Popovich, but Aldridge and DeRozan weren't enough. Those solid guys as DeRozan and Aldridge moved on, Keldon Johnson and Lonnie Walker, Derek White, even, who the Spurs moved on from midway through last year, who's been phenomenal in Boston. But think of what he was asked to do. Go from being a starter and one of the key guys in the lineup to being your 6th or 7th man in Boston, and a guy who's now a gap filler and looks phenomenal because he's been asked to do less. And the Spurs, I think, had to come to that conclusion that a lot of us were coming to even a few years ago, to say, yeah, you may have played these guys above their draft position. It's not good enough. You're going to have to not be a barely playoff team and getting mid-round picks. You might have to be bad for a few years to try to get a star. And so we've seen them pull the plug. A couple of draft picks in Danilo Gallinari, who was a throwaway to make the salaries match. and the Atlanta Hawks wind up with an all-star caliber, all-defensive player in Dejounte Murray to put next to Trae Young, and one piggyback back to Minnesota. I think why people hate the Gobert deal is that it feels like you were overpaying. You were paying 120 cents on the dollar, maybe even a buck 50 on the dollar to get Gobert, whereas Dejounte Murray was gotten for fewer draft picks and less draft collateral, and almost felt buying low, didn't it? I mean, yeah, he's not a superstar, but for what Atlanta gets and what they gave up, it felt like they were able to buy low. Your thoughts on the deal and what he's going to bring to a Hawks team that was arguably the most disappointing team? I know people could talk about the Nets or the Lakers, but for me and Arky, we had picked the Hawks, and it's just coincidence I got the shirt on. We had picked them to be a top 3 team in the East last year, and they were out in the play-in.
So this way you get Arky to ban me from coming on again. I'll route this back to Minnesota for one thought, then back to the trade here. When you mentioned that it being like a Minnesota overpay, 100%, it absolutely was. What you had was a team that was convinced that the best way to unlock Cat and Edwards for what their ceiling of how to get there was with the 5 versus with the guard, because Murray was under question with rumors with Minnesota as well.
And I thought that would have been phenomenal too if you still had Patrick Beverley.
And if you think of what they gave up, if they wanted to throw that type of package over at Murray, they could have trumped the offer. Mm-hmm. They chose Gobert as the guy that they felt was good there. Now, when you look from Atlanta, from what they paid within it, that couple of draft picks, again, when you're going for it, when you're saying we're a perennial playoff team, and you're talking about a late first round pick or first round picks in that regard, with Dejounte Murray, with him and Trae Young, again, this feels another one of those where strengths and weaknesses match up very well. You're getting a chance to build around. Some thought for Atlanta to make that type of trade that they'd have to take away talent, take like a John Collins or take away someone within that.
It was almost a given that Collins was going to be on the block, and it's potentially that San Antonio didn't want him for as young as he is, but it's a massive contract.
And I think it allows them to hold on to him as a different asset for a different player if they choose to move on from him. To get Murray without having to give up from your core is a huge move. This is a team that has been trying to figure out, how do we build around the star talent that we have? How do we put this together? And when you look at this trade, I think this is an excellent fit for guards together, how they blend together, and then you still keep your size and physicality that you have down low.
And Atlanta last year was just dysfunctional. They could not get it together and string together any wins. They had no momentum, which is crazy because it was all momentum that got them into the playoffs and really as a threat the year before. And, you know, there are all sorts of fingers being pointed about Collins and Trae Young not working well together. But I think what was really telling beyond not having that consistency, they had zero identity last year. They were middle of the pack in nearly every category. And when they did finally get into that first round matchup with the Miami Heat, so they did make it out of the play, and I misspoke there. When they got into that first round matchup with Miami just punked them. They just pushed them around. They got whatever they wanted. Trae Young couldn't get anything going. Atlanta was impotent on the defensive end, and you really saw Miami at its strength. And I see this type of move as Atlanta addressing 2 issues. One, if the ball was not in Trae Young's hands, they had nothing going most of the season. But Trae Young could be swarmed and did struggle. And what do you do on the nights that he doesn't have it going? Dejounte Murray, and I said he's a good enough offensive player. Well, it's still is a guy who scored 20 points a game, 21 last year, and dished out 9 assists per game. Granted, that was on a Spurs team that was asking him to do everything. So those numbers are going to come way down. But the ability to have logged those numbers does not go away. And I've said this before, when guys move on somewhere else, you can kind of pre-predict a narrative. When they had exorbitant numbers at a previous stop where they were asked to do too much, and now they come to a better team, and their numbers are going to come down, and some people are going to go, well, wait a minute, he's not having as good of a year because he was scoring 21 and now he's only at 16.
But their efficiency goes up.
And if the team is winning, but as a secondary ball handler, a secondary scorer, another outlet, you did not have that with Kevin Huerter, who the Hawks allowed to move on to the Kings. You did not have that with Cam Reddish before he was moved to the Knicks. They had, DeLon Wright and other career backup point guards whose job was to facilitate to other people, when really what they need out of the point guard spot is scoring. And so you get that with Murray, but the ability to play Murray, who's a big guard at 6'4", next to Trae Young in the starting lineup, then addresses the bigger issue, which was defensively. And Murray averaged 2 steals a game, 8 boards a game. There's going to be a toughness there, a versatility, especially if you get a healthy DeAndre Hunter. If you get Clint Capella for the entire year, that's 3+ defenders in that lineup. You've got Young as your flamethrower offensively. You've got John Collins as kind of a talented gap filler offensively, who I think has been overexposed when asked to do too much. I do not think he's a max contract player, but can be a very productive scoring forward for you. And if you're going to be able to bump him back even just a little bit and ask that of him instead of everything else, where Collins doesn't have to be your second best player every night like before. He can be your third best now on most nights, and that's going to be phenomenal. Don't forget, they don't get rid of Bogdanovic. They're still able to keep him and now bring him in with the second unit. Onyeka Okongwu, who played very, very well last year in starters minutes for Capella and off the benches there. You've got two of the 3 Holiday brothers there as well. So I like what Atlanta has done to rebuild and address these things. And I think you're going to see a little bit more of a defensive identity, at least something to hang a hat on, whereas last year they had nothing.
You're going to have better cohesion. And this goes again to what I like about being able to stagger minutes. Because if everything rises and falls when it's in Young's hands, having another person who's capable in that regard, again, you can stagger them to get more of a better efficiency out of the second unit. But then these guys will play together in crunch time, where it will, the first 5 and the last 5, it will complement each other well. And again, health was a big challenge for them last year. When you have these guys, if you can get the full season of Capella, if you get the interior presence that you need, you now have help on the wing in that regard. And then Trae Young doesn't have to do everything when you have that. It's going to, on paper, as you talk about it, you have it where it makes sense. It's going to make Young better by not over trying to do too much. It's not going to make Murray do too much, again, by having a better complement around him. And then their strengths and weaknesses correspond to each other. Again, so from a staggered minute standpoint, from a crunch time, it's a great fit for Atlanta. And hopefully when you couldn't quite put your finger on, I don't know what this is, but it's not working. Maybe this helps put all the pieces into a better fit.
Before we get to love-hate with some of the free agent signings and most of them being re-signings, let's talk about one other trade. I'd be remiss not to mention it. It's a trade that I love, just 110% love. This is another guy that I was hoping would be on the radar of just about every team out there, and that's Malcolm Brogdon, who winds up with the Boston Celtics. They give up Daniel Tice, a lot of their end-of-bench players, and then a pick or two, which they've been hoarding for a long time. They've got enough of those to give up. So it's very little that they had to give up. The Pacers heading into a rebuild, fine to get Brogdon's contract off the books. Brogdon playing at a position where they need to open things up now, especially as, the Pacers have brought in some youngsters in Tyrese Halliburton, who they want to play at the point guard, Chris Duarte, who they had at the shooting guard spot, and now, even drafting Ben Mathurin, who's going to get a lot of minutes there. So Indiana willing to move on from a guy who just has not been healthy since he was in a Pacers uniform and struggled health-wise with the Bucks too prior to that. But when he does play, has been such a phenomenal gap filler. And Boston in the NBA Finals, we saw that if there was a weakness with that team, and granted, some of it had to do with Robert Williams not being entirely healthy and Marcus Smart coming back from injury, but you saw that Boston was about 8.5 deep. Peyton Pritchard was usable as the backup point guard against certain matchups, but not against others. And otherwise, it was a lot of riding Derek White and a lot of Grant Williams, which was fine, but there was a limit to that. And now by adding Malcolm Brogdon, and even in bringing aboard Danilo Gallinari, who they just signed today off free agent list, you see Boston rounding out that bench. And from everything we've heard, it sounds like Marcus Smart will continue to be the starting point guard. Brogdon is going to be, like Derek White, a guy who will come off the bench at either guard spot And that's what I love here is the amount of versatility. Because Marcus Smart was a shooting guard up until last year where he went to full-time point. Derek White played some point guard in San Antonio, but more than not a shooting guard. Brogdon has played both throughout his career. And then you put Jalen Brown in the mix. Again, probably a guy traditionally that'd be more of a small forward, but the Celtics have gone big and played him at a 2. And you've got 4 guards there, plus Pritchard as a 5th, as kind of your distributor guy. That, man, can you get versatile and can you pack a lot of different punches with that? And for the Celtics to have gotten Brogdon for really next to nothing, yeah, there may be some injury issues, but you're not going to ask him to be a starter anymore. You're going to ask him to be Gaffler. Is there anything not to like about this deal? I mean, out of the 3 that we've done, yeah, I can find a few things I'm concerned about with Gobert. I like the Dejounte Murray trade a lot. I don't love it from San Antonio's point of view. Atlanta, I get it. From Boston's point of view with this, man, I love this.
Again, I think one of the things that's been hard, and I'll throw another question at you in response to this. We've seen a lot of re-signings. And so one question I want to ask is, why do you think that is? There's not been a lot of movement in the first half of the offseason from player choice, players that we'd rather stay with what we know versus what we don't. But before getting to that, you have a team that has decided to be aggressive in going after what it is its perceived weaknesses, that the bench was just not deep enough and perhaps versatile enough to handle things in the postseason. When you now have 4 guys who can do this, it doesn't matter who gets hurt. You have someone else who can step right in. The plug and play is more capable there than most
with this group.
And then adding Gallinari to go with it, you have. I think one of the struggles when Tatum or Brown was having an off night, where was the scoring coming from? Smart, excellent defensively within it, but from the guard position, there wasn't always a consistency in offense that could sometimes cause the things to sputter.
Yeah, you were asking Smart to play a little bit out of comfort level, although he did score a lot of points in college. And you were asking Horford to really step up, and at his age, he would give that to you on some nights, but not others.
What this now does with the quality of versatility that you have, when someone is having an off night, there's someone else who can now step in and keep things from completely crashing. I think that's going to be huge during the season. That's going to help with the win totals in that regard. But then also come postseason, you need that extra punch off the bench. And Brogdon now going into more of that quasi 6-man role, depending upon what you need against what team you're matching up against. I think that's an excellent fit. And again, you have a team that perceived weakness. They've now gone and strengthened that with 2 very quality veterans to add to that team. But I do want to ask you, why do you think that is? This has been a very quiet first half of the offseason. Signing wise, and from movement wise, from free agency. Why do you think that is?
I think it was always going to be a quieter year because you didn't have a lot of like really top tier names. And the teams that did have money were typically, there weren't many of them this season. They were not going to necessarily be better destinations for somebody to go to. You saw the Knicks spend big to get Jalen Brunson. Arky and I did talk about him quite a bit before he signed because it was kind of a given that he was going to sign at that point.
Oh, you mean we're going to talk Knicks?
We'll talk Knicks for a second. And we'll start, this is our love-hate. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Arky and I talked about how we understood the Knicks needed to spend money. There was less likelihood that they were going to get a Bradley Beal or a Zach LaVine, though I would have been way more comfortable handing either of those guys a giant bag of cash. Brunson as an undersized guard who played very, very well in Dallas over the last season and a half especially, and earned the right to have this, big boatload of green for himself. At the same time, now that he isn't with a Luka Doncic, now, and yes, he's got some other, talented players in Julius Randle and RJ Barrett, but when the defense is able to tee off on him a little bit more, is that going to be an issue? He's not necessarily a distributor. Well, as a scoring guard, does that fit with a guy like Julius Randle who can distribute but wants to score? RJ Barrett wants to score. It'll be interesting to see how that fits. But the Knicks were one of the only teams out there that had that kind of money. Portland was maybe going to have that kind of money, but only if they were going into a full rebuild. Oklahoma City has some money. Nobody's going to go there right now as a free agent because they know they're in a rebuild with a bunch of young players. Oklahoma City never would have spent that money even if somebody was available. So there was that aspect to it. Not a lot of high names, not a lot of money available. And then the Kevin Durant trade demand really put the kibosh on, somebody like Detroit, who has had some money, but again, is not a very attractive place to be yet, going after DeAndre Ayton. That's been put on hold. Detroit also drafted big this year. They may no longer be interested in Ayton. There's just not a lot of other options out there at this point. So you have things sticking, and we'll talk about Durant. We'll talk about Kyrie and Russell Westbrook here at the tail end of the show. But we'll play love-hate. I said with Brunson, it was kind of I get they had to spend their money.
I'll say I love that one. As far as love-hate, I love that one for Brunson. He has 104 million reasons why to love that as well. But again, New York, big market, Madison Square Garden, a chance to be the guy in one of the best markets within it. If it works out great, you become an extra legend there. Your status goes up immensely, marketability, everything. If it doesn't, you can cry yourself to sleep with 104 million bucks. So again, I love that from his perspective of putting himself in a chance to really succeed in a place that really needs it. Again, a place that's looking for a point guard within it. They went out and got what they thought was the best point guard available within it. So it's hard to fault for taking a swing at something. Now we have to see if it actually works.
All right, we're going to go real quick with these. You get a couple of sentences max, just kind of down the list. Brad Beale re-signs with Washington. I hate it. He's stuck there. Yes, he gets his bag of money. They are a team that's stuck in the middle that is prolonging a rebuild. I would have loved to see Brad Beale, for example, go to the Knicks, basically go anywhere else and try that and see him in a different uniform. We don't get that. I don't love that at all.
I take it as my version of hate is Beale hates real estate realtors.
Fair enough. Anthony Simons re-signs a big deal in Portland. He was a restricted free agent. It was assumed that this was going to happen. I love it. Simons has shown a lot of potential. Simons is your Damian Lillard insurance policy. I don't think Dame lasts another year there. I know he just extended 2, but I think he plays one final season in Portland. He's giving them a chance to try to rebuild now for a third time around him. Whether Simons and Lillard can play together is up for a lot of interpretation. We're going to find out. But if you got to move Lillard, you've at least got a guy in-house who can take over that spot and may wind up being an all-star in the future here too.
Yeah, I love it for Portland as well because you need young cores that you can build around. If your centerpiece is now potentially on the last hurrah here within it, you need guys that you're going to start a rebuild with. Obviously, with Lillard, you can get some pieces within it and continue instead of doing a complete teardown. It can help you with that rebuild.
Zach LaVine stays with the Chicago Bulls on a full extension or full re-signing. I love it. I was saying I thought Zach's best bet was to stay in Chicago, where they've shown that they want to build around him. They showed a lot of improvement last year. He would have gotten less money and potentially wound up in a worse situation. LaVine, immensely talented, but flawed still. He's got his weaknesses. Chicago seemed to understand how to put him in a good position to succeed. That was not going to be a given if he had gone somewhere else.
As we've been seeing this entire offseason, the reason why I love it is the grass isn't always greener on the other side. He's already comfortable. It's been a good fit. Keep it going.
Lou Dort stays with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Just a massive, rebuild there. I like the deal. I don't love it. There was other teams that were interested. Dort, again, looks like an all-NBA defender. You're going to need players like that. And again, Oklahoma City's got money to burn right now. The only way this comes back is if a lot of these other young guys play to their talent level. You're talking about Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you need massive contracts for them. And then some of their other guys, Darius Bazley, Alexei Pakashevsky, and so forth, play above even what you think. You could get into a situation having handed Dort this big contract, much like we saw a long time ago with Durant and Westbrook and Jeff Green and James Harden, all coming, Reggie Jackson, they all came up for deals and they had to start parting that out. But again, we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. Next one up, do you love it or hate it? Yusuf Nurkic stays in Portland.
especially for keeping Lillard for another year. Then I like it.
James Harden hasn't signed yet, but it sounds like a done deal that he'll stay in Philadelphia, and the rumor is he's going to take $15 million less. I love it because Harden has a lot of reputation rebuilding to do. If he had jumped teams, it was going to be in the tank. He's got to make this work in Philly. Taking less money is a sign that maybe his head's in the right place.
Head's in the right place, and he's loving losing money the way he's willing to lose defense. So, it kind of fits.
That was below the belt. Mitchell Robinson stays in New York. I'm fine with it. The deal, $60 million for 4 years. It's a lot. And then you bring in Isaiah Hartenstein. You've got a tandem there that you're going to split minutes. Is $60 million what you want to pay for a guy that you're going to split minutes? Is Hartenstein being kind of the more offensive center, Mitchell Robinson being the defensive one? I'm not sure there, but I don't hate it again because there wasn't a center walking through the door who was going to be a massive upgrade over Robinson.
Yeah, I think they found a way to hedge the bet by bringing in Hartenstein along with it. So you keep what you have because you don't want to take a step back, but a chance to try to maybe maneuver between them for whatever it is that you need at that time.
You're a Bucks guy as well as a Timberwolves guy being in Wisconsin. Bobby Portis comes back to the Bucks. I got to assume you love it like most Bucks fans do, right?
Yeah, that's one. Bring back those core pieces and roll it back.
Chris Boucher stays in Toronto. That one's a given. PJ Tucker, this was one of the few guys of note that jumped ship. He goes from the Miami Heat, a contender, to the Philadelphia 76ers, a team that wants to be a contender. He's reunited with Daryl Morey and James Harden. What do you feel about him arriving? It's easy to say we like that, but to arrive on a 3-year, $30-some million deal at 37 years old is where the love dries up really quickly for me.
You love it now. You may not love it in year 3.
Yeah, you may not love it in year 2 is the problem either. Like, PJ Tucker just signed the same deal that a lot of younger players do who are going to move the needle more, and you're fine with a 3-year deal to see what happens. Tucker, you know what's going to happen as he hits 40, and I got to say this. I think Tucker's been coasting off reputation the last couple of years. As effective as he's been, you saw 2 years ago when he wound up with the Bucks during their title run, he was helpful but couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. In Miami, there was a lot of times that he played well and other times that he really got played off the floor, I thought. And for him to be able to get this deal, I don't know if he gets that much if it wasn't for the Harden and Daryl Morey connection.
The connection definitely played a role. I think it obviously took the 3rd year to pull him away from Miami. And I think with him, the key is less is more. You want him on the floor for effective, smaller minutes. You keep him out there too long or do too much, definitely not back-to-backs. You want to very much manage him, and then you can tell when he's starting with the game. Is he effective today? Is he not? Be ready to pull the plug early. And I think if you can use that connection, you can still get the most out of him.
The Golden State Warriors, NBA champs, keep one in Kevon Looney. It's easy to love that and kind of a no-brainer. A surprise, though, for Gary Payton II to leave, where he really played himself up again from a summer league call-up, a guy who was applying to be video coordinator with the Warriors to then being a starter in the playoffs until he got hurt. And he parlays that into a deal with the Portland Trailblazers, 3 years, $26 million. You love it for Gary Payton. Do you love it for the Blazers to bring him in? I'm a little bit concerned with this one. Payton seemed like a guy who looked really, really good in what Golden State did. I'm not sure, and I know there's the Oregon connection there for Payton, but I'm not sure what that looks like when you're on a middling team and you're asked to do a whole lot more.
Especially when not a young player that's ascending. You're talking a guy who's 29 going on age 30 within this. Not that he can't be effective within it, but there's more risk there than I think you would be typically comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. Nick Batum resigns with the Clippers, not a needle mover. Jayshawn Tate resigns with Houston. I love that deal. I love what the Rockets are putting together with their starting 5 young guys. We'll talk more about that some other time. Mo Bamba stays in Orlando. That one is curious. It really seemed like they were going to move on. Caleb Martin with Miami, and yes, I'm just running down the list till we get to some changes here. JaVale McGee leaves the Suns to go to the Mavericks. I love it for the Mavericks, who have, they bring in Christian Wood. They've now added McGee. It means that they're going to try shoring up that middle of the floor where Dwight Powell and Maxi Kleba are both guys I think that can slide to the 4 a little bit too. What I don't love, though, is for the Suns. McGee was so serviceable for them when DeAndre Ayton missed games, and now that you don't know what the future holds for Ayton, if he just gets the qualifying offer and that's all he's got, there's the possibility he walks in a year. McGee was maybe going to be too old, but if you have a massive deal offered to Ayton and he goes, now you don't have a starting center.
You went from a strength to one of the most largest weaknesses of that position in the NBA.
Yeah, good luck starting Bismack Biyombo at the 5 all year long, because that's what's going to happen. Malik Monk leaves the Lakers to the Kings. Monk never played last year for the Lakers when they really could have used him, and it's the Kings. We'll talk about them when they stop being the Kings. Victor Oladipo goes to the Miami Heat where he was last year. This is a good deal, I think, for all involved, because Oladipo still has to prove he can play at a high level long term. He played at a decent level last year, but that's about as far as he got. Miami, having lost PJ Tucker and losing Duncan Robinson, they need to be able to prove and that they've got a punch off their bench now, and that it's not just Tyler Hero. A couple of other deals. I'm running down the list to look at guys who maybe change spots. John Wall, of course, bought out by the Rockets. It was eyebrow raising to some people that he wound up with the Clippers. You love that, hate it? How do you feel about it?
I like it. I think at a good veteran team, a chance to not going to be asked to do as much out of the gate, but if he finally has his health, the talent has always been there. Very curious to see what he looks like this year. I think this, again, one of the more intriguing storylines this year.
Bruce Brown leaves the Brooklyn Nets to go to the Denver Nuggets. Man, do I love that. The Nuggets have made some moves here this offseason to try to shore up the fact that they were not a good defensive team last year, and under the assumption that with Jamal Murray back healthy and Michael Porter Jr., they're going to have enough on the offensive end. So Bruce Brown shows up along with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope to try to shore up defensively what they do. They've still got Aaron Gordon, Jeff Green, who do, a decent job on that end as well. A couple of other names here before we talk some of the big guns at the very, very end. Dante DiVincenzo from the Kings to the Golden State Warriors. Is this a really, really sneaky good deal? We saw DiVincenzo on some contending Bucks teams.
This is what the Warriors do, right? They find a way to take these smaller trades and they turn them into larger roles. Again, we just talked about Gary Payton, right? With the from that element to it. So when you add this here, can that be that exact type of move for them? Have that type of impact? Absolutely.
And speaking of the Bucks, Joe Ingles, who was hurt last year, and the Utah Jazz needed to cut bait with a guy who had been kind of a cornerstone player for them. Ingles goes to the Blazers, never appears in a single game. And I thought when Ingles got traded was kind of the moment that you saw the season go from middling in Utah to really go south. It seemed like the locker room presence there was really missed. And Ingles now, he's going to have to show that he's healthy. He's almost 35, but he goes to a Milwaukee Bucks team that, kind of like the Boston Celtics, felt really good about the starting lineup, but a little bit shaky in the bench area. Ingles helps to address that. I thought, I love this deal.
Good veteran teams find ways of adding in those role players that can be key cogs in ways that show up in the stat sheet and in ways that don't. And especially when things get rocky within it, you need some of those, some of that element to withstand the long season. He fits in all sorts of ways.
Lonnie Walker IV moves on from the San Antonio Spurs to the Los Angeles Lakers, essentially replacing Malik Monk as like the young shooting guard. Monk never played last year because he was hurt. I really like this deal for the Lakers. They need young legs wherever they can get it. Walker is a two-way player, decent on the defensive end. He's longer than Malik Monk is, handles the ball pretty well, is an okay scorer, okay shooter. Again, the Lakers just need to find as many of these type of guys for cheap that have upside as they can. I'm a big fan of that one. We'll take a look at one more here, and that's going to be Andre Drummond, moving on from the Brooklyn Nets, where he did see some big time. Drummond saw some big time with the Lakers, too. Moves on to the Chicago Bulls. He's going to back up Nick Vucevic there.
Again, I like that one as the Bulls have been looking for some size and more of a defensive presence within it. So you like the good fit.
All right, final couple of topics, and then we'll wrap it up. Kevin Durant demands a trade. Is he going to get it? We've talked already off the air, and Arky and I talked about with Kyrie that we thought him coming back to the Nets on a one-year show-me extension essentially was the smartest thing involved for everybody involved. Like James Harden, Kyrie's got he's got to rebuild his reputation. He did a lot of that actually last year when he came back and played so well in the games that he was allowed to play. He was not out of shape. He didn't loaf. He I thought played phenomenally, but now he's going to have to do that for a full season, not be a distraction. Oddly enough, it was almost as soon as Irving said that he's coming back for the year that Durant demands the trade. After all this, these guys wanted to play together. Harden, they could not make it work. And we said from the start, these were prickly personalities that you were going to be matching up. But at the same time, as we alluded to when we talked about in free agency, there's not a lot of free money out there. There's not a lot of cap space. There's not a lot of teams that have the assets to give up for Durant, get him back, and still feel like they made an upgrade. Do you think Durant even gets traded this year, or do the Nets just kind of slow burn this and force him and Kyrie to do one season and see how it goes? Because I think that's where it's trending.
And if any of the rumors are to be believed of what's been out there for what the asking price has been for anyone calling for him, those offers scream. Think of your fantasy player that you want one decent guy and they come back and then want your top 4 players for him. That's what the Nets have done for anyone who wanted to actually pick up the phone and call and ask about his availability. That screams we're not trading him. But they can still say, hey, we listen to offers. You are an extremely valuable player. Of course, we want to try to get equal value in return. And what they're saying is there's no way of getting equal value in return for him, which is, so does this end up coming back and rolling it back for one more year and see if also the cooler heads prevail? Here's why I think they took a calculated risk on whenever you're going with a player who's unhappy and demanding out. If we try to either slow roll it or reject it, what's going to be the repercussions to that? And I think Durant is in a position where, again, he wanted to be here. He's already opted out of different places. He's getting close to damaging his reputation, depending upon how he plays this. If he plays good soldiers, comes back to this, fine, we're going to roll this back for one more year and see what happens and go from there. That will help him immensely. If he tries to do the James Harden discontent within it,
or sit out, that sort of thing,
I don't see how that ultimately works well for him. I don't see him going that way, and I don't see any team that can actually, even if the trade demands come back, I don't see another team that can do that. And still have the team that he's going to be a contender or be better than the situation that he is leaving. The only one that is still intriguing to me is what happens with Phoenix. I think that's the one that could potentially put together a package that would make the Nets feel like, okay, we got solid value. And then also going to a very star-studded team with Phoenix as well. But again, I think their offer that was reported within that doesn't sound like that's happening anytime soon.
I think with Brooklyn asking so much, a team like the Charlotte Hornets probably won't have enough to give, but that'd be an interesting place to pair LaMelo Ball and Kevin Durant. And Charlotte does have some really interesting young pieces in Terry Rozier. Miles Bridges, of course, just destroyed his market, but that might be the type of guy that Brooklyn goes, okay, we'll take a flyer on him in a sign and trade because we're going to raise the asking price. We now want a Jalen McDaniels or a PJ Washington involved in that as well, plus some picks. I think you could put something together. I don't know if that's going to happen, but honestly, if I'm Kevin Durant, I give it the 1 year too. Kyrie's giving it the 1 year. You look at this as a last dance situation, and if it works, you can build off of it. If not, you don't, because I look at the Nets roster and you're still 10 deep. You've got Kyrie, Seth Curry in the backcourt. You've got Ben Simmons presumably coming back to finally play basketball again, whatever you're going to get out of that. Kevin Durant and Nick Claxton in your starting five. Then you've got Royce O'Neal, Joe Harris, TJ Warren just signed there recently, Patty Mills, whatever you can still get out of Blake Griffin. You still have some pieces there to be a very good team, especially when Kyrie and Kevin Durant are your top two players. Like, you're going to be in that mix. And unless the personal situation has fallen apart that bad, which again, guys, we warned about this, not that anyone would listen to us, but like every single person out there watching this from the outside said, ooh, you want to put Kyrie and KD together? You want to put James Harden into that mix too? basketball wise, we got some concerns, but they'll probably be okay. It's, can these guys get along? And so far the answer has been a resounding no. But if you could just make this work for one more year, to me, it is worth doing that and playing up your trade value, playing up that good soldier reputation, like you said, because then Kevin Durant can come out of this spotless. Said, I gave it everything. I was there for 4 years, essentially. Stars came and went. Guys got hurt. I was good. I tried it. It was a chapter. It didn't work. I'm on to my next thing. I'm an NBA champ. I'm a multi-time MVP. You come out looking fine in that.
Well, how about we actually see if it can work? Because we didn't see it last year with health and everything else going on. Let's see these guys together. I'm intrigued to see from Simmons to with Kyrie and with Durant, everything together. Like, let's see it. Mm-hmm. I think the disappointing thing has been trying to ask out with the 1 year from that new how it's being comprised. Let's at least see what can happen with it. And I think it's just being too hasty. And I think the Nets have very delicately waded through this to try to see, can we, with cooler heads prevail, can we actually just let's go on the court and let's show what can be done.
Last question is one that Arky and I have talked about a little bit, so I just want to pick your brain on it. The Lakers, of course, trying to find a home for Russell Westbrook. They're talking the talk right now about how they like their roster and they love Russell Westbrook and they want to start him, but the rumor continues to be out there and Kyrie being attached to it. If you were the Lakers and you could get rid of Russell Westbrook, but yes, you had to take on Kyrie, would you do it? And on the flip side, if you're the Nets and you know you are going to lose Kyrie after this 1 year anyway, would you take on Russell Westbrook and reunite him with Kevin Durant?
What I think to me is when you look at trades like this, I want the guy with the highest ceiling, right? Because we're trying to do it's championship. That's the whole point of all of this. Who has the highest ceiling of those two guys?
It's Kyrie.
It's Kyrie, and it's not close. And so to me, it feels like you're trying to get something for Kyrie for getting him, but the better bet is to stick with Kyrie or find a way to make that work, then make a trade that you are knowingly going into saying we are downgrading our roster to do this. I don't see how that helps you or helps the conversations with Durant at the end. If you're saying, guys, we need to find a way to put personalities aside and get on the court because, hey, this guy can help you get to a championship. Look what he's done before. Look what he's capable of within. You can make that argument. I don't know if you can make that argument of we're going to lose talent, but replace with a guy you might like better. But we just took lowered our chances of getting there. I don't see how that in whatever friction is there with Durant and dealing with, I think ultimately talent wins on that one. If you're the Lakers, you take that trade.
Yeah, and remember, Kevin Durant has already left Russell Westbrook once, right? He left him in Oklahoma City when Westbrook was at the peak of his powers and was one of the most devastating players in the NBA. Now he's been rather devastating for other reasons that aren't so great. I also would not love it if I'm Brooklyn to get Russell Westbrook and all of his shooting woes, and you're making an assumption that him and Durant still like each other. I'm not sure that that's there, but you're adding it to a team with Ben Simmons. So now you're back to having two guys who don't stretch the floor. You can put Ben Simmons on the floor with Kyrie Irving and Durant and be okay because of their phenomenal shooting ability and their ability to create shots from wherever they're at. Simmons may actually be an asset to them in being a setup type of guy and then a lead defender, which he showed he was very capable of in Philadelphia. So yeah, I would not love it if I'm Brooklyn, if you're the Lakers and somehow can pull that off, to get a guy on a 1 year deal and then to be able to be out from under it. Much, much better, although Westbrook's deal is coming up here at the end too. That, my friends, is episode 113 of Basketball by Association. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, if you want the video version, you can find us on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe while you're over there. Ring that bell. And if you're watching on the video version and you want the audio only, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, that's where you get your podcasts, and that's where you can get BBA. On behalf of Arky Shea, I'm Joel Cordes. Want to say thanks to Dan Lewig for joining us here on the Bill Lambert episode. This one is in the books. Dan, say goodbye to the good people.
Goodbye.